So on day 3, we woke up to a wonderful breakfast. I don't see any fish on this plate, Mark, but we did have fish for breakfast on occasion. Lots of vegetables and lots of flavor. Lots and lots of flavor. Well, this was the Sea of Galilee that morning. This is actually about 8 o'clock because we had an appointment to take a ride on one of the boats in the Sea of Galilee. So they even put up an American flag and had us sing the American national anthem once we got out into the water, which was pretty cool. They take you out on these, well, they're not little boats. They're pretty good sized. They could fit 50 people on there easy. And you can see also over here on the hillside, this is the Mount of Beatitudes, and this would be the hillside in the valley where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. It's also probably the same hillside where he fed the 5,000. And behind me, or behind the boat here, this is the city of Tiberias. In fact, the sea is not called the Sea of Galilee today, or at least not by the locals. It's called the Sea of Tiberias, because the city of Tiberias is right on the edge. And this is the south side of Mount Arbel here, and the point is on the other side. But here, these are the boats that we got to ride on. And then we went to a little museum next to the sea, and we got to see an old first century boat that they unearthed in the 80s. And this would have been from right at the time of Christ. So this is what their boats looked like, the fishing boats there. And remember, this is the place where after Jesus was rejected in Nazareth, he moved his ministry to Capernaum, which is right on the coast, right on the water. And many of his disciples, 7 of them, I think, were fishermen. And so these were the boats that they would have been traveling in, possibly bigger ones also, but this would have been a normal-sized fishing boat. In order to commemorate the fishermen here on the north side of the Sea of Galilee who were disciples of Christ, there's a chapel built here in Magdala. Magdala is the city where Mary Magdalene was from. And so there's lots of history here as well, but they didn't know where exactly this city was. They knew it was in the general area of northern Galilee, but they didn't find it until, I think, about 2006. So it's been very recent that they unearthed the city there. And they unearthed it on accident because a guy bought the land in order to build a hotel there. And the very first day of digging, they uncovered the synagogue, and the first thing they pull up when they started digging was this table where they would put the Torah scrolls when they read. And you can see very small there a menorah between or 2 vats, which are probably grain offerings. So this is a replica. The originals in a museum right by the southern steps of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. But this is the synagogue where Mary Magdalene, or the main synagogue in Mary Magdalene's village. There were more than one synagogue in that village. They unearthed another one across the street and up the hill a little bit. So this may not have been her synagogue, but it was in her city. And they've even dug out perfectly preserved mikvot, which are the ceremonial baths. They would have one for women and one for men on either side of the alley here. I think this was the men's. The women's was a bit smaller. They've also got some wonderful modern mosaics, and I just thought they were really pretty, so I included pictures of them here. And of the 4 mosaics there, they each commemorate different events that took place on the Sea of Galilee or in the city of Magdala in the Gospels. So there's Jesus and Peter when Peter attempted to walk on water. Here is Jesus with Mary Magdalene cleansing her of her demons. This is Jesus and Jairus' daughter when he raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. And interestingly, this city street, they have modeled after the street that they uncovered in Magdala, so that this was kind of mosaic they did in celebration of, now we know exactly what the city street looked like. Um, we can paint a picture that looks like reality. And this was the call to two of the disciples, but I just can't remember which two they were. Now, under this chapel, which has the masonry, there's another older chapel because they've uncovered a first century floor. Apparently, they rearranged some of these stones, but outside these windows, they've got the originals still outside that were the first century city square, if I remember correctly. And they've got another nice painting here at the back of the chapel, and it's a painting of the Syrophoenician woman touching the hem of Jesus' cloak. And so it was just a beautiful painting and a beautiful day and a beautiful city to be in. Well, we went from there back across the northern part of the Sea of Galilee, and as you can see, it's big, but it's not so big that you can't see to the other side. We're at the northern shore here, and down here, that's the southern shore. So I like to say, or like to relate this to like the Port of Tacoma area. It's about that big, between the Port of Tacoma, Vashon, Gig Harbor. It's not huge, but it's big. This hillside here on the left, that is or this hillside and valley is probably where Jesus fed the 5,000. And this is the view from the Mount of Beatitudes, where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. It's a beautiful area, and when you look over the edge here, it serves as a natural amphitheater, so he would have been easily heard down the hillside. It's a banana farm now, but it was a hillside at one point. And I mean, none of you are in your 80s, but just so you know, age isn't really a factor in traveling. This is Sandy Meisinger. She's 86, and she went with us all 17 days. She went to the Petra extension as well. And in fact, my friend Doug and I, we chickened out in going any further well before Sandy did. She kept going. All the older ladies on our tour had the attitude of, this might be my last time. I'm not going to skip anything. And so you can see Sandy was doing quite well, and age is no factor. This is the garden outside the city of Capernaum. Capernaum comes from the Hebrew Kafar Nahum, which is the city of Nahum from the Old Testament. But more memorable for us is that the city of Capernaum is where Jesus moved the head of his ministry after he was unceremoniously removed. Actually, it was pretty ceremoniously. They tried throwing him off a hill from Nazareth. He set up camp in Capernaum and would have taught primarily at this synagogue in Capernaum. And the lintels of that synagogue, they of course fell in that big earthquake in 749 that pretty much toppled a lot of the buildings there in the outlying regions. But the lintels have been recovered, and we see pomegranates and grapes and flowers on them, just like you would have in the temple. There's a Star of David, and this is noted as one of the earliest discovered Stars of David. The Star of David kind of developed as a symbol of national identity while they were in captivity in Babylon, and so it was brought back with the returning tribes from Babylon. There's also a 5-pointed star there. And this on the actually this isn't a great picture of it, but this is a carving of the temple that was on the lintel of this synagogue, and a carving of the menorah, which is these kinds of images of the menorahs, but primarily the menorah that's pictured in Rome, right outside the Colosseum, where they depict the Romans coming back in with all of their loot from Jerusalem, including carrying the menorah from the temple. That's the only way we know how or what the menorah looked like. So it's cool that we're now uncovering lots of depictions of menorahs, because we know we got it historically accurate. Also, I might note 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a this menorah has 7 branches. So this would have been the kind of menorah they used in the temple. But nowadays they use, for Hanukkah, a 9-branched menorah commemorating the victory of the Maccabees and the oil that was supposed to last for 1 day that lasted 8 days plus 1. So they have a 9-pointed menorah as well. It's actually not called a menorah, but the 7-pointed one is called a menorah. This is the temple in Capernaum. The architecture you see here was not 1st century architecture, but 4th century architecture. The foundation of the temple, however, is or synagogue, not temple. The foundation of the synagogue is where the synagogue was in the 1st century, where Jesus would have taught. And you can see out here the remnants of the city. It's mostly toppled. But over here, there's a building with a couple of red domes. And this is traditionally, at least by the Greek Orthodox Church, where the house of Peter's mother was. The Catholics also have a site where they believe Peter's mother-in-law lived, but it was more likely the central building in the city of Capernaum, right in front of the synagogue. Not very likely that that was Peter's mother's house, but here off in the on the other side of the hill, this is more likely the home of Peter's mother-in-law. Now, interestingly enough, the Catholics believe in celibacy for its popes and priests, but they have a giant museum commemorating the house of Peter's mother-in-law. And I mean, I hope you guys are smart enough to realize that if you have a mother-in-law, that means you have a wife. Peter himself was not celibate, and he was married. So no problem with that. Don't know why the Catholics have a problem with that. Okay. This is the shore of the Sea of Galilee, right in front of Capernaum. And why I took a picture of this very uneventful seashore is because a very important event occurred in Capernaum, and especially right on the shore of Capernaum. And this is where Jesus' ministry took a 180, sometime around the 1 year mark in his ministry. For the first, let's say, half of his public ministry, from the time he declared himself to be the Messiah and was performing signs and miracles to give evidence to that fact, and he was offering the kingdom of God to Israel, but continued to have conflicts there with the Pharisees, who continued to reject him. Most of this occurred around the northern part of the Sea of Galilee, but there was one day in particularly where he performed a miracle of the Messiah, a miracle that only the Messiah was supposed to be able to perform, and that is to cast out the demons from a man when that man was mute. The Pharisees believed that they were able to exorcise a demon so long as they were able to communicate with it and ask it its name. They would invoke its name to gain authority over it and cast it out. And so they said that only the Messiah would be able to cast out a demon causing muteness. Jesus did this at least 2 times, it's specifically recorded, but this was the first time. And the response of the people was, this can't be the son of David, can it? And that's a messianic title. The Pharisees hear the people murmuring that, like, is this the guy? Is this the Messiah? He's doing what even the Pharisees say only the Messiah will be able to do. And the Pharisees say, no, but he is casting out demons by the power of Beelzebub. In other words, he is not using the Holy Spirit power, to perform this miracle that only God is able to do, only the Messiah will be able to do, but rather he is using satanic and demonic power to do so. And this is the unforgivable sin that they committed. That unforgivable sin is rejecting the Messiah as a nation based on the accusation of demon possession. Well, he was sitting in a rowboat just off the shore, or a fisher boat just off the shore, after this event, after they had accused him of being demon possessed, and his disciples, or some of them, got in the boat with him, and they were about to set sail, but Jesus begins teaching to those who had gathered on the shore to listen to him, to hear what he had to say. And his teaching style changed. Rather than telling them clearly who he was, what he was doing, and offering to them the kingdom, he stopped offering them the kingdom. He no longer, from that point forward, ever again offered the kingdom to first century Israel. They had committed the unpardonable sin, and the offer was withdrawn, and it would be restored to a later generation of Israel. But from that point forward, he began teaching only the gospel of salvation, of personal faith in him and the sacrifice that he would make. But very interestingly, he gives this sermon in parables for the first time, and from that point forward, he always teaches in parables in public settings. But then they cast off across the sea, and that's when we get the event of the storm rising, and Jesus rebuking the storm. But they get to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, to the Gentile side, the area of Decapolis, and they encounter a demon-possessed man. And now, the significance of this is incredible. That on one side of the shore, Jesus is accused of being demon-possessed because he's casting out a demon that only God can cast out. And he gathers his disciples and he takes them across the sea. For what purpose? To encounter a man who truly is possessed by demons. And so if the accusation is that Jesus is possessed by demons, he shows them a man that's possessed by demons, and he has absolutely no control over himself. Next to the composed, able, powerful Jesus Christ, it is clear to his disciples that the Pharisees are liars, that they are not correct in their accusation that Jesus is demon-possessed, and Jesus casts out the demons who are in this demon-possessed man. That's the episode of the demoniac, or the man whose demons are legion. So this shore, or this shoreline, was the place where everything changed during Jesus' ministry. All right, so I pointed out Mount Arbel from the other side. Here is Mount Arbel from Magdala, as we are on our way to Tiberias, and from Tiberias we're going to climb the mountain, and this is the view from Mount Arbel. So this is the cliff where they tried to throw Jesus off. I'm standing up there. It's hard to really capture the perspective in a photograph, but it's pretty high, and kind of unnerving to stand too close to the edge. But it was cool nonetheless. And once again, just like I said, the plants are literally growing out of rocks there. Even in these high points, there's flowers everywhere. This also happened to be the day where the tension with the Gaza Strip started to escalate, and Israel started ramping up its military in preparation for it. And sure enough, within 1 day or 2 days, 1 day, the next day, Gaza started launching a bunch of rockets into Israel. And of course, it was a massive failure, because not only does Israel have the Iron Dome, but while we were there, they rolled out another protective measure called David's Sling. and the Gaza rockets are just firecrackers by comparison. So um, I actually felt safer in Israel while Gaza was launching missiles into us than I feel walking around my church at night. Because, for one thing, we know that all eyes of the entire militarized nation are on every single threat and protecting its people and its visitors from any possible threat. And so we knew that we were incredibly safe and protected.
A question about David Sling is that I saw there's a new technology being developed that I thought it was going to be ready till next year. Is David Sling where they can destroy missiles with a laser, or is that something different?
No, I don't think it's their laser technology, but I
Okay.
have heard that they're working on it. I didn't hear that they were ready to roll it out anytime soon, but yes, they are working on laser technology. David's sling is a faster response. It's still missile based, but they're able to get a faster response to short range missiles that are fired just over the border. Um, but even still, Gaza's rockets are terrible. They're not very good. A lot of the rockets that they tried to fire at Israel landed in their own territory. Um, it wasn't quite half, but it was an embarrassingly high percentage of their rockets didn't even make it into Israel. I think only 3 of their rockets landed in uh, partially populated areas, but they've got kibbutz all over the edge of Israel. It's their first line of defense. So most of the rockets are falling in fruit orchards, and once in a while it'll land in a kibbutz settlement where you've got foreign workers mostly. Um, they still do their best to protect those kibbutz. Obviously, they don't want anyone stepping foot into their country without them knowing. They've got a very advanced fence around their entire country, cough cough, that protects them very well. And I think while we were there, of all the missiles fired, um, there was only one person killed, and it was in one of those kibbutz. So I would definitely not recommend visiting the areas being directly bombed, but there there are many, many, many safe places in Israel, and there are very few unsafe places in Israel while they are bombing. And we spent most of the time that they were slinging bombs into Israel in the city of Jerusalem. And it was mentioned to us by our travel agent who met us there and spent some time with us in Jerusalem. She mentioned that Jerusalem is the safest place we could possibly be in Israel while bombs are going off because it is disputed territory that is primarily Muslim populated, especially on the east side of it. And they are not interested in bombing the city that they want to have for themselves. They don't have um, advanced technology to direct their missiles to any specific location, and they are too scared that it might hit the Temple Mount and the Dome of the Rock. So they are not willing to fire a missile anywhere near Jerusalem. So Jerusalem's a very safe place to be, but most places are very safe even while they're bombing. We did get the tour guide. They make sure that we stay extra safe while we're there. So as soon as they started bombing, we canceled our plans to go to Ashkelon and Ashdod, which are there on the coast right by the Gaza Strip. And even when we were going through Arad in that lower area near Beersheba, we kept a close eye on the news, and they pushed us through no problem. But from that point, anytime we were going into the West Bank, they would just be extra careful. They'd call ahead, check the safety, see if there was any signs of escalation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts. And there was only one place that we had to cancel going to. We before we went, we knew we wouldn't be able to go to Hebron Hebron was one place we wanted to go, but it's just not safe there because of on the ground issues, and it's more about our Israeli tour guide than the tourists themselves. We wouldn't be safe with our tour guide, and we were not willing to travel without a local. So we didn't go to Hebron, but we were planning to go to Mount Gerizim. And when the bombing started, we weren't able to get into Mount Gerizim, which is Shechem, but also about 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks before our tour began, there was a terrorist attack in Shechem, which is a Palestinian settlement. It's not an Israeli settlement, and it's in the heart of the West Bank, where these two German tourists rented an Israeli car, and they have Israeli cars have yellow license plates, Palestinian cars have white license plates, so they drove this Israeli rented car with white license or yellow license plates through this very Palestinian settlement, and I guess they got to be in their bonnet about it, and they tried to kill these two German tourists. And so the government asked that nobody travel into Mount Gerizim, Shechem area for a while. So they are doing everything they can to make sure that everybody's as safe as possible. And one reason is, and it's true of both the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government, both of them stand to lose a lot from losing tourism. And so not just Israel, but the Palestinians do everything they can to make sure that tourists don't get caught up in their conflict. Because the Palestinians, if they don't have tourists coming in to see their sites in their areas, if they lose the Catholic tourists coming to see the holy sites, if they lose just general tourists, they lose a lot of their revenue as well. Israeli government has a lot to lose from it. So there is nothing safer to be in Israel than a tourist. All right, back to the pictures here. These are the rocks in the Sea of Galilee. And one very cool thing in Israel, there are no prohibitions against taking rocks. So we all have quite a few rocks in our pockets, because if there's anything Israel has an abundance of, it's rocks. Everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. Every hillside is more rock than dirt. Now, again, that's why it's important. The plants grow right out of the rocks. It's almost as if they don't need soil. But even in certain tells where there's archaeological sites, they just have thousands of years of potsherds and rocks. So they tell you what kind of potsherds and rocks you can't take. Like if you find a potsherd that has a design on it, you're not allowed to take that. You've got to report it and turn it in because it could be historically significant. But they literally use the potsherds that they find that aren't significant to pave the pathways. So they allow tourists to take potsherds and rocks. So cool, quick, easy, cheap souvenirs. So I grabbed a couple rocks from the Sea of Galilee. Again, this is the Sea of Galilee. You can barely see Mount Arbel over here. We're on the kind of the north east side looking southwest. This is Tiberias on this hill over here. And the sunsets were always beautiful on the Sea of Galilee. It makes it very clear why Jesus spent the vast majority of his time in Galilee and not in the hill country, Jerusalem, Beersheba, Jordan Valley. This is really the place to be, is Galilee.